The building stood quietly on the edge of Charlotte's industrial district, a 16-story mix of steel, glass, and good intentions. From the outside, it looked like progress. New signage, energy-efficient lighting, and a diversity pledge printed proudly in the lobby. But as anyone who'd worked there more than a week knew, some things ran deeper than policies and posters. Inside Wilburn Manufacturing HQ, the days rolled on with the precision of clockwork. Coffee at 8:05, first meetings by 9:00, corporate lunches at 12:30. The suits on the upper floors barely noticed the maintenance crew unless something spilled or broke. And in the middle of that invisibility lived Thomas Jenkins, or just Tom, to those who remembered to ask. Hello, friends. Today, I've got an incredible story that might just change the way you see the world around you. It's a story of perseverance, transformation, and the unexpected paths that life takes us down. In this story, you might even recognize parts of yourself or find the motivation you've been looking for. Sometimes, the most powerful moments happen when we least expect them. And today, you'll hear about one such moment that turned a man's life upside down and gave him the power to change everything. But don't just take my word for it. Stick around and listen closely, because this story could be the one that inspires you to take action or look at your own journey from a new perspective. And remember, if you don't want to miss out on more of these fascinating stories, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Trust me, tomorrow's story will blow your mind even more than today's. So don't miss the surprise we've got waiting for you. Tom had been working the early shift for more than 20 years. Always the same uniform, dark blue coveralls, name tag faded from 100 wash cycles, white towel slung over one shoulder. He was usually in by 4:30 a.m., long before the office lights buzzed awake. He'd sweep the floors, empty trash bins, and wipe down the windows before the first intern even thought about logging into Zoom. He didn't speak much, not because he was timid, but because he listened. He listened better than anyone else in the building, and people had no idea what they said when they thought no one important was around. Over the years, Tom had heard it all. The private conversations, the casual slurs, the backhanded comments from folks who hadn't lived through half of what he had. He'd heard managers complain about diversity hires, secret affairs whispered behind closed doors, and interns boasting about nepotism that landed them six-figure jobs straight out of school. He never repeated what he heard. He just tucked it away like dust swept under the corner of a rug. Quiet, waiting. But Tom was more than just a janitor, much more. Tom grew up in Gaffney, South Carolina, about 60 miles south of Charlotte. Born in 1957, he was raised in a world that made it clear what a black boy could and couldn't be. His father, Harold Jenkins, was a bricklayer who'd survived the Jim Crow South with hard hands and harder truths. He told Tom, "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far, son." That stuck. Tom learned to work with his head down, but always with his eyes open. He was sharp, tested in the top percentile in high school, but college wasn't in the cards. Not when his mother fell sick and his little sister needed taking care of. So he took jobs, odd ones at first, delivery boy, warehouse loader, then eventually maintenance. But Tom didn't let go of learning. While scrubbing floors, he listened to audiobooks on economics, real estate, and investing. He'd visit the public library on weekends, devouring everything from Warren Buffett to Dr. Claude Anderson. In his late 20s, he scraped together enough money to buy a duplex in a declining part of Charlotte. He fixed it up himself and rented it out. A few years later, he bought another. By 40, he owned 9 rental properties, all paid off. No one at Wilburn Manufacturing knew that. Why would they? He was the janitor. By 2019, Wilburn Manufacturing was in transition. The founder, Charles Wilburn, was nearing retirement. The company, which had started out in auto parts, had expanded into green tech, but the profits were flat. Whispers of a merger with a larger holding firm out of Texas had been swirling for months. That's what brought all the executives into Charlotte that fall. A high-stakes board meeting on the 15th floor. Rumors said the new parent company would clean house. Layoffs, restructuring, maybe even close the East Coast division entirely. On the morning of the meeting, October 22nd, 2019, the building was buzzing. Suits from out of state were pouring in, the conference room was getting cleaned twice over, and interns were making coffee like their lives depended on it. Tom had already been there for hours. By 6 a.m., he'd mopped all 15 floors, scrubbed down the bathrooms, and restocked paper in the conference room. He even made sure the windows didn't have a single streak, though no one would notice. At 8:55 a.m., he rolled in one last time with his mop. Someone had called for a quick touch-up upstairs. Maybe it was the young executive, Spencer Keller, who always made sure things looked good when corporate was around. Spencer was in his mid-30s, MBA from Duke, watch more expensive than Tom's first house. When Tom walked into the boardroom, mop in hand, Spencer saw him and smirked. "Hey, you lost, man," he said. "The basement's 2 floors down." A few chuckles went around the room, light laughter, but the kind that sticks. Tom said nothing, just wheeled the mop bucket into the corner and waited. 20 minutes into the meeting, things were tense. Slides weren't working. One of the visiting execs, Robert Kinney, a seasoned investor with silver hair and Texas boots, leaned back in his chair and spoke with a tone that turned heads. "We seem to be missing someone important." Silence. People looked around. Everyone was accounted for except Mr. Wilburn, who had retired just last month. That's when Tom stepped forward. No mop this time, just a brown leather folder. Spencer looked up, confused. "We're in a private meeting," he said, half laughing, trying to assert control. Tom calmly opened the folder and placed a neatly stacked set of documents on the table. "I'm not here to clean," he said. "I'm here to speak." He looked around the room. Half were stunned, the other half too shocked to speak. Then Tom continued. "As of September 15th, I became the majority shareholder of Wilburn Manufacturing. I purchased Charles Wilburn's shares after his retirement. Quietly, legally, completely." The silence was deafening. Tom didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He just stood there, letting it settle. "I've been with this company for 21 years, he said. "Not in a boardroom, but I've seen how it runs. I've listened, I've learned, and I've invested every dime I earned into understanding business better than any man who ever stepped over my mop bucket." He turned to Spencer. "You laughed this morning, called me lost, but I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. You? We'll see." The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Not a single laptop key clicked. No one dared take a sip of coffee. For a long moment, they all just stared at the man they had ignored or mocked for years. Tom Jenkins. The janitor, the man with the mop bucket, now stood at the head of the table, his calm demeanor completely unchanged. But there was a weight in his voice now, the kind of weight that came from decades of experience, not in offices, but in life, in hard work, in humility, and in watching people underestimate him over and over again. He didn't rush to speak. He let the tension stretch, and in that silence, all the assumptions and judgments the room had made about him suddenly felt naked and uncomfortable. Finally, one of the older board members cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, voice cautious. "You're saying you own the company now?" Tom nodded, not arrogantly, just matter of fact. "I'm the majority shareholder. I bought out Mr. Wilburn's personal holdings in the company shortly after his retirement last month. We'd been in quiet negotiations for the better part of a year." Spencer Keller leaned forward, his eyes darting around the room, looking for backup that wasn't coming. "That's not possible," he said quickly. No one informed us of any change in leadership. There are protocols." "There are," Tom agreed, "and we followed them, legally, privately, as was Mr. Wilburn's wish." He placed a second document on the table, a notarized letter signed by Charles Wilburn himself, confirming the transaction and Tom's position as the largest stakeholder. The visiting investors looked at each other, exchanging murmured words. It was clear they knew this deal had legitimacy. No one at the table was ready for this. No one had prepared for the man they once asked to empty their trash to walk in and tell them he now held the keys to the entire building and their futures. Tom didn't look angry. He didn't look smug. He looked like a man who had carried something heavy for a long time and had finally decided to set it down. "I know what you're all thinking," he said. "I know how ridiculous this sounds to you, that the janitor, the black janitor, somehow managed to end up owning the company you thought you ran." He paused, his voice steady. "But I didn't come here today to prove anything to you. I came here because I care about this company. I care about the people who work here, the ones you never invite to these meetings, the forklift drivers, the cafeteria staff, the single moms on the factory line. I came here because I've seen too many good people get let go while executives hand themselves bonuses." No one spoke. He walked slowly to the window, looking out over the skyline of Charlotte. The morning sun was bouncing off the rooftops, casting golden light across the boardroom floor. "When I started here, I was 38 years old. I had one pair of work boots and a busted truck. I came in every day before sunrise and left after dark. Not once did I ask for recognition. I wasn't interested in handouts or favors. I was interested in building something, quietly, steadily." He turned back toward them. "I took every raise, every overtime hour, and invested it. Real estate, mutual funds, private equity. I never touched the flashy stuff. I stayed disciplined. I lived in the same small house I bought in '92. And when Mr. Wilburn was ready to sell, I didn't need a bank loan. I was ready." Spencer, still trying to reassert some kind of control, stood up. This is an ambush," he said, his voice rising. "You're not qualified to run this company. You're a janitor." Tom's eyes locked on him, not with anger, but something deeper, disappointment. "And yet," he said quietly, "here I am." Someone near the end of the table chuckled under their breath. It wasn't mockery. It was disbelief, mixed with something dangerously close to respect. Spencer sat back down. The man from Texas, the investor with the boots and the steely gaze, finally leaned forward. folding his hands. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, "what exactly are your plans with Wilburn Manufacturing?" Tom walked back to the head of the table and took a slow breath. "My plan," he said, "is to restore integrity. I want to rebuild the trust between leadership and the workers on the floor. I want promotions to be based on merit, not golf buddies. I want to stop outsourcing jobs to save pennies while destroying communities. And I want to stop rewarding executives who exploit loopholes while the janitorial staff gets their hours cut." He looked each of them in the eye. "This company used to stand for something. Mr. Wilburn knew that. That's why he chose me." The older investor nodded slowly. "And what about us?" Tom didn't blink. "If you want to stay on and help rebuild, you're welcome. But if you're just here for the profit margins while others suffer, I'll buy you out just like I bought out Charles. And I'll do it quietly." There was no applause, no fanfare, just a long, heavy silence, a silence filled with realization, shame, and something else, the beginning of respect. Tom picked up his folder, gave a slight nod, and turned to leave, but just before he reached the door, he paused. Then he looked back at Spencer. "Oh," he said, "and about that basement you mentioned? I was down there this morning, clean as a whistle. You might want to check the top floor instead, starting with your office." And with that, he walked out. For the first time in years, Tom didn't take the service elevator. He rode down in silence in the executive lift, alone, his leather folder still under his arm. The hum of fluorescent lighting above felt quieter somehow. Outside the glass wall of the elevator shaft, Charlotte's skyline looked different too, not because the buildings had changed, but because the man looking at them finally had the view he'd earned. He stepped off on the 12th floor, not because he needed to, but because that floor was home to the Human Resources Office and one person he needed to speak to before word started spreading. Maria Sanchez, the HR director, was mid-sentence with an employee when she spotted Tom. Her brow furrowed slightly. Then her face shifted into that familiar expression. Pleasant confusion, polite surprise, the look people gave when they weren't quite sure what someone like Tom was doing on their floor. "Tom," she asked, standing, "everything okay?" He smiled gently. "Better than okay, Maria. Mind if we talk a minute? In your office." She blinked, glanced at the folder, and motioned him in. Once inside, Tom closed the door behind him and took a seat. "Maria," he said, folding his hands, "you've always treated people fairly. I've seen that. You stood up for workers when you could, even when it meant pushback. That matters to me." She nodded slowly, cautious. "Thank you. I try. Well, I wanted you to be the first to know," Tom continued. "Effective as of last month, I'm the majority shareholder of Wilburn Manufacturing. That board meeting upstairs? It's real. I'm stepping in to oversee the transition." Maria's mouth parted slightly. Her posture stiffened. You're the new owner?" she asked. "I am," he said simply. It took her a few seconds, but then, unlike some others, she stood, extended her hand, and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Jenkins. That's incredible." Tom smiled. "Please, still just Tom." "No," she said, "not anymore. You earned that title." Her eyes began to water slightly. "People are going to lose their minds when they hear this." "They will," he said, "and they'll question it. I want you to be ready for that. And I want you to help me start making changes from the inside out." Maria nodded again, her voice steadier now. "What do you need?" "I need to know who's been passed over for years, who's been spoken down to, who's been made to feel small. I want their names. I want their stories. And I want them in that conference room next week because we're rebuilding this thing from the floor up." Maria didn't hesitate. "You got it." Tom stood, shook her hand, and left without another word. He had more stops to make. By 11 a.m., word had begun to leak. Not officially. No memos yet. No company-wide emails. But whispers in break rooms, texts flying between departments, coffee machines buzzing with the same question, "Did you hear about the janitor?" Except they couldn't even agree on what they'd heard. Some said he won the lottery. Others claimed he was Wilburn's long-lost cousin. A few said he had blackmail on the board. But by lunchtime, the truth was starting to crystallize. And for some, it was hard to swallow. In the executive wing, Spencer Keller was pacing his office, tie loosened, voice raw from too many phone calls. He'd already spoken to 2 board members, both of whom confirmed the paperwork. Tom Jenkins was indeed the majority shareholder, legally, cleanly. And now Spencer was realizing something he hadn't considered before. It wasn't just about business, it was about him. He had laughed in Tom's face that morning, along with others. But now those laughs rang in his ears like warning bells. He'd spent years stepping over people like Tom, people he thought would never matter in the grand game of business. Now one of them had flipped the entire board. He looked in the mirror and saw not a confident young exec, but a boy pretending to be a man, exposed. For once, he was the one being watched. Downstairs in the cafeteria, a different kind of buzz was taking over. Maintenance crews, factory workers, admin assistants, people who'd worn the same uniforms for years, walked the same halls, answered the same phones, people who had long ago stopped believing someone like them could make it to the top. But now they were hearing the same impossible phrase again and again. "Tom owns the company." They said it slowly, carefully, like it might vanish if spoken too loud. The man who had swept their floors, offered rides in the rain, helped carry heavy boxes without ever being asked, he was now the one in charge. Some people cried, some laughed in disbelief. But the overwhelming emotion wasn't envy. It was hope. If Tom could do it, maybe they weren't stuck after all. Maybe the rules of the game weren't as fixed as they'd thought. Maybe there was still a way forward, not fast, not easy, but possible. Back in his small home on the edge of the city, Tom pulled into his driveway just before sundown. The old truck creaked as he climbed out. His boots hit the gravel, and he took a long breath of autumn air. The porch creaked under his weight, same as it had for 30 years. Inside, the walls still had the same faded wallpaper. His kitchen still had that hum from the old fridge. His coffee pot still had a stubborn drip that needed fixing. But tonight, everything felt different. He wasn't thinking about boardrooms anymore. He was thinking about Harold, his father, the man who once told him, "They'll call you every name but smart, every name but leader, every name but boss. Don't let them decide who you are." Tom reached into the drawer by the phone and pulled out an old photo. His father standing beside a brick wall he'd built by hand in 1962. The pride on that man's face wasn't about money. It was about knowing he'd created something that would last longer than him. Tom whispered quietly, "We made it, Pop." The house was silent. But something deeper echoed in that silence. Justice, not just served but earned. And it wasn't over. The next morning, the story broke wide open. It started with a small local business blog out of Charlotte, a simple headline, quietly published. It should have gone unnoticed, but someone shared it on Twitter, then another. Then it hit a Facebook group for Black entrepreneurs. By noon, it was trending on LinkedIn. By 3 p.m., it was on CNN. And by dinner time, it was everywhere. The media loved the contrast, the imagery. Photos of Tom in his navy blue janitor's uniform beside the new company statement with his signature on it. Video stills of him walking calmly out of the boardroom. The man who mopped their floors now owned the keys to the whole building. It was perfect headline material. But it wasn't just viral because it was unusual. It was viral because it meant something. For every black father who'd been told to lower his voice, for every working-class mother passed over for promotion, for every kid in a low-income neighborhood who had big dreams but no roadmap, Tom Jenkins was a living, breathing reminder that they weren't crazy to believe. Meanwhile, inside Wilburn Manufacturing, things were shifting fast. Monday morning came with a full staff email. Good morning. My name is Tom Jenkins. Some of you may know me. Some of you may not. But I've walked these halls for 28 years. And as of last month, I became the majority shareholder of this company. I've seen a lot from the sidelines. I've watched people give their all without recognition. I've watched others climb without lifting a single hand to help. That ends now. I believe in hard work, integrity, and fairness. And I believe this company can thrive without forgetting who built it. Effective immediately, we are conducting a full internal audit of wages, promotions, and department spending. A new ethics committee will be formed with voices from every level of the organization. If you've ever felt invisible, I see you. Let's get to work. Tom Jenkins. No one had ever sent an email like that. Not from the top. In the break room, Marcus Howard, a 49-year-old machine operator who'd been stuck in the same role for a decade, printed out the email and taped it to the wall. He didn't say anything, but he stared at that last line. If you've ever felt invisible, I see you. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like coming in tomorrow might be worth it. Upstairs, not everyone was cheering. Spencer Keller's desk was covered in resumes, not his own, yet, but from his peers, other execs who saw the writing on the wall. Some were spooked by the media attention. Others, more privately, admitted they didn't want to work under the janitor. They didn't say it like that out loud, of course. They couched it in phrases like concerns over direction, cultural misalignment, looking for a new opportunity. But Tom saw through it. He expected it, and he welcomed it. In fact, the very next day, he called a mandatory meeting for all department heads. It was in the main auditorium. Everyone showed up, partly out of curiosity, partly because no one wanted to miss whatever came next. Tom walked in wearing a gray blazer over his usual work shirt. Nothing fancy, just clean, confident. He stood on the stage, looked over the crowd, and smiled. "Let's talk," he said. For the next 20 minutes, he laid out a new vision for Wilburn Manufacturing. Internal mentorship programs for workers who wanted to grow their careers. Tuition reimbursements for night classes, including trade schools and HBCUs. Quarterly open-door days where any employee, regardless of role, could sit down with leadership. And perhaps most boldly, a 90-day review of all upper management positions, including salaries and effectiveness. "We're not cutting," he said. "We're rebalancing. We're not punishing success. We're redefining what success looks like." He paused. "Some of you in this room have had a lot of power for a long time, and some of you used it well, others used it selfishly. Either way, now's your chance to earn it again. Silence, then a single clap, then more. It wasn't thunderous, not yet, but it was real. The dam was cracking. Later that night, Tom sat alone in the old janitor's closet. He hadn't cleared it out. It was still his space, in a way, a place of reflection. He sat on the little bench, looked around at the mop handles, the bleach bottles, the industrial rolls of paper towel, and he felt something most CEOs never feel: rooted. This closet had been his office long before any boardroom, and he wasn't going to forget it. Not now, not ever. His phone buzzed. A text from Maria Sanchez. "Just a heads up. Good Morning America wants to interview you, and the New York Times. You okay with that?" Tom stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "I'll think about it. But first, let's fix payroll." And so it began. The janitor, who became CEO, wasn't interested in parading power. He was interested in changing the culture. He was interested in dignity. And in a world where money often shouted louder than merit, Tom Jenkins was doing something rare. He was using his silence, his patience, his steady work ethic, not just to climb, but to lift. And the people who'd once looked right through him, they were finally seeing him now. Tom Jenkins didn't sleep much the night after the reveal, not because he was anxious, but because he was thinking, planning, remembering. He sat on the back porch of his small home in East Charlotte, rocking slowly, the wooden chair creaking beneath him. The air was still and quiet, except for the hum of cicadas and the occasional distant bark of a neighbor's dog. In his hand was a photo, creased at the corners, faded with time. It showed a young boy standing beside a man in a dusty work uniform, his father, Harold Jenkins, a janitor, a father, a black man who had known what it was to carry the weight of the world in silence. Tom ran his thumb along the edge of the photo. "Did I do right by you, Pop?" he murmured. His father had taught him a lesson early. "You don't need to be loud to be strong. You need to be steady. Let the work speak for you." It had. But now, Tom had a louder platform, and silence wouldn't change the system. It was time to speak with purpose. The next 90 days were a whirlwind. Tom began each morning the same way he always had, arriving before dawn, walking the factory floor, shaking hands, asking about families, machines, holidays. Only now, those same employees looked at him differently, not with fear, but with possibility. There was no red carpet rolled out for him, no private parking spot, no corner office. Tom turned the former CEO's lavish glass suite into a communal innovation hub. The corner office, he gave it to the new director of worker advancement, a position he created and filled with an African-American woman named Renee Morris, who'd started as a warehouse supervisor and spent 20 years being overlooked. Tom's own desk was placed in the middle of the floor, open to anyone who wanted to talk. And talk they did. Old-timers, new recruits, folks who had never once walked past HR, now coming to share ideas, frustrations, and stories. One custodian, James, showed Tom a sketch of a redesign for the inventory layout that cut restocking time by 20%. It was implemented within 2 weeks. Tom didn't just open the door. He took it off the hinges. The media firestorm hadn't died down. It had evolved. Tom appeared on the cover of Forbes, Time, and Black Enterprise. The story hit home for millions, especially among older generations who had seen the civil rights movement, watched the struggles of integration, lived through redlining and Reaganomics, and now, finally, witnessed a victory that wasn't symbolic. It was real ownership. And yet, Tom remained reluctant to become a celebrity. He turned down most interviews. When 60 Minutes came calling, he agreed only on one condition. I talk from the factory floor. No suits, no makeup, no script. The segment aired on a Sunday night. It showed Tom walking alongside employees, laughing, nodding, listening. The interviewer asked him, "Why do you think people are so moved by your story?" Tom paused. "Because a lot of folks in this country have worked their whole lives, done everything right, and never got seen. I'm not a miracle. I'm proof that the ones who've been invisible have always mattered. We just forgot how to look." It was the quote that made headlines. Of course, not everyone was celebrating. Several board members resigned quietly within the first 2 months, some citing philosophical differences. Behind the scenes, a small but vocal group of investors began stirring unrest. They whispered concerns about changing culture, about standards slipping, about prioritizing politics over profits. Tom saw it for what it was: code. He didn't flinch. Instead, he brought in a new consulting partner, Rose and Deacon, a black-owned strategic firm based out of Atlanta, known for turning around companies through inclusive innovation. They ran a full audit. Within weeks, wasteful spending was slashed, procurement was streamlined, employee turnover dropped 34%, and profits? They climbed. By quarter's end, Wilburn had posted its strongest financial report in 7 years. The message was clear. Equity didn't hurt business. It made it smarter. One afternoon, as Tom was sorting through old personnel files, he came across a name: Thomas Jenkins. His mother. She'd worked for Wilburn Manufacturing for 12 years in the 1970s as a cleaner. No benefits, no pension. She'd been let go in '83 after requesting time off for a medical emergency. Tom sat still for a moment, staring at her file. There were no thank yous, no records of appreciation, just a termination date. He called Maria Sanchez. "I want a new plaque in the entry hallway with every name of every employee who worked for more than 10 years. Custodians, line workers, all of them. We call it the foundation wall." He paused. "And I want my mama's name at the top." The next month, during a ceremony that brought together generations of workers and families, the foundation wall was unveiled. An older man, one of the original floor managers, stood before it in tears. "I worked with your mama," he told Tom. "She used to bring us coffee on night shifts. She told me you were going to change the world someday. Looks like she was right." Tom smiled. "No," he said, "she was the one who changed it. I'm just trying to catch up." The foundation wall had been unveiled to mixed reactions. Some older employees, long buried in the system, felt a quiet, enduring pride. They stood near the wall, tracing their fingers across the names of colleagues who had been with Wilburn for decades. Folks they'd worked side by side with, some of whom had died before seeing the changes that now felt so within reach. But for others, especially those in upper management, the wall was a stark reminder of the growing divide between them and the new vision. Tom Jenkins wasn't blind to the tension. The whispers in the halls had grown louder, the uncomfortable stares more frequent. Some of the executives, who had once been untouchable, were now wary of their roles in the company. Others tried to align themselves with the new CEO, while a handful quietly plotted their exits. It was an unspoken truth. Power was never given without resistance. Tom knew it would take time. Change was hard. But the hardest part wasn't the business strategy or even the media attention. The hardest part was keeping his core values intact while managing the increasingly complex and challenging role he now held. Tom walked into the building just before 7 a.m. The familiar creak of the old floors beneath his boots felt grounding, like they were calling him back to the roots of his journey. He paused for a moment in the lobby. There was something different in the air now. A weight had lifted. Yet the burden of leadership was even heavier than before. He nodded at a few workers sitting at their desks, then stopped by the coffee machine, where Harold, the man who had worked in maintenance for 40 years, was brewing the first pot of the day. "Morning, Harold," Tom said as he poured a cup. "Morning, Mr. Jenkins," Harold responded, his voice still gruff but with a new edge of respect. "I heard the board's got some ideas for next month's shareholder meeting. Big things on the horizon, huh?" Tom paused, looking at Harold over the rim of his coffee mug. "If they're smart, they'll be on board with real change. We're not about to turn back now." Harold chuckled. "Don't I know it? I didn't work this hard for no changes." Tom smiled and made his way up to his new office on the factory floor. When he reached it, he sat at his desk, still plain, still functional. The window looked out over the warehouse floor where machines hummed and the rhythmic clanking of metal against metal echoed. The sound of progress, his progress. A couple of hours later, Tom sat across from Maria Sanchez, the HR director, and Renee Morris, the new director of worker advancement. Maria had been the first to back Tom's vision, and now, 3 months later, was a key player in implementing his changes. Renee had once cleaned the floors and kept the office plants alive, but had risen through the ranks, never given much credit for her skills until Tom arrived. Now, they were sitting at a conference table drafting the company's next moves. Tom flipped through a stack of proposals, his mind already working through the details. "I'm not looking to make waves just for the sake of it, but I want us to get ahead of the curve. We're going to reinvest in our workers, fair wages, equal opportunities, and most importantly, trust." Renee looked at him, her eyes bright. "I've been trying to push that for years, Tom. It's like the company just didn't see us. But now there's room to breathe." Maria nodded. "You've got the workers' loyalty, Tom. The shift is happening, but we need to be clear on what we're offering them. They need to feel heard." Tom leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "We're going to launch an employee ownership program," he said, surprising them both. "Every worker here will have a stake in the company. I want everyone from the janitor to the managers to feel like they have a piece of what we're building." Maria raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "I'm not joking, Maria. It's time for us to prove that equality and equity don't just live in theory. They have to be tangible." Renee grinned, but there was a hint of caution in her smile. "You know this is going to be a tough sell with the old guard. Some of them won't take it well." "I know," Tom said, "but it's the only way forward. We're going to create an environment where people can thrive. But if they can't get on board with that, then they're not part of the future we're building." The new employee ownership program was a bold move, but it also put Tom directly at odds with the board of directors. Some members had begun calling him a radical in closed meetings, but Tom had expected the resistance. He had prepared himself for it. One chilly Thursday afternoon, Tom was summoned to the boardroom. There, sitting across from him, were several familiar faces. Spencer Keller, of course, and a few other prominent executives. Spencer's face was tight, his posture stiff as he folded his hands on the table. There was a note of arrogance in his voice when he spoke. "Tom," Spencer began, "I think you're misunderstanding the situation here. What you're doing, giving employees equity, it's reckless. The workers don't understand the complexities of running a company. We can't risk shareholder interests on goodwill." Tom's expression didn't change. "No, Spencer, what's reckless is ignoring the people who've kept this company running for decades. What's reckless is thinking that the board is the only group that matters here. You've had your chance to lead. Now, it's time for the workers to share in this success." Spencer's face flushed red. "You can't just ignore the financial implications of this. If this goes sideways, we're looking at a huge loss of control." Tom's voice remained calm. "Maybe it's time to give up some control. Maybe it's time to trust the people who've been here since day one." A few moments of tense silence followed. The room seemed to hold its breath. Finally, one of the other directors, a woman named Caroline, spoke up. "Maybe we've been too focused on the bottom line," she said softly. "Tom's right. If we don't change with the times, we're going to get left behind." The conversation took a turn after that. By the end of the meeting, Tom had the board's reluctant approval. They weren't all on board, but they didn't have the power to shut him down. Tom left the boardroom feeling exhausted but triumphant. It had been a small victory, but it was his. The employee ownership program was set to roll out within the next quarter. However, not everyone was happy. In the weeks that followed, a few senior executives began to exit. Some sought opportunities elsewhere, others simply couldn't stomach Tom's radical changes. Spencer Keller, who had once been the CEO's right-hand man, was among the first to leave. Word quickly spread that his departure wasn't entirely voluntary. But Tom didn't let it faze him. He had bigger things to focus on. The company, despite the pushback, began to change in ways no one could deny. Wages increased across the board. Employee turnover dropped by more than 25%. New hires, particularly women and people of color, filled positions that had previously been reserved for the elite. In one of his more powerful moments, Tom hosted a company-wide meeting where he stood before hundreds of employees. He shared stories of the workers he had known over the years, people who had sacrificed so much but had never been celebrated. "I'm here today," Tom said, "because of every person who's ever swept a floor, fixed a machine, answered a phone. You're the reason this company exists, and it's time you were recognized for that." The applause that followed was deafening. Tom Jenkins had changed the face of Wilburn Manufacturing. But even more importantly, he had changed the face of corporate America, one brick at a time. Months had passed since Tom Jenkins had stood before the board of directors and declared his intentions. The once rigid corporate walls that had divided the workers from management were slowly breaking down. The employee ownership program was in full swing, and while not everyone was convinced, the changes were undeniable. One crisp autumn morning, as Tom walked through the factory floor, he stopped to speak with a group of new hires. They were younger, eager, and full of hope. One of them, a young woman named Clara, had just celebrated her first year with Wilburn. "Mr. Jenkins, you've made a difference here," she said, her voice a mix of gratitude and excitement. "I never thought I'd have a chance like this. an opportunity to be part of something bigger. Tom smiled, his heart full. You've earned it, Clara. You're a part of this company's future now, just like everyone else. He looked around the factory floor, the hum of machinery, the busy workers, the sense of purpose in the air. It was all so different now. The weight of his father's wisdom echoed in his mind. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You need to be steady. And steady he had been. But there was one last piece to the puzzle that Tom hadn't quite solved yet. One afternoon, Tom received a call. It was a familiar voice on the other end, Spencer Keller. The man who had once tried to block his vision was now seeking him out. Tom, I wanted to talk, Spencer said. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how you were right. Tom didn't say anything right away. Instead, he let the silence linger for a moment. I'm listening, Tom said. Spencer continued, his voice softer now. I thought you were crazy, but I see it now. You've changed this company, and you've done it in a way that none of us saw coming. I respect that. I owe you an apology. Tom felt a quiet satisfaction wash over him, but he knew that true change wasn't about rubbing it in. It was about continuing to move forward. I appreciate that, Spencer, Tom said calmly, but the apology isn't necessary. The work's not done. This company belongs to everyone now, not just me, not just you, everyone. As the call ended, Tom stood at his window, looking out over the factory. For the first time in years, he felt like he had finally done something that mattered, not just for him, but for all the people who had worked alongside him, who had walked the same path, and who had shared the same struggles. Tom Jenkins had truly rewritten the rules, not just of business, but of what it meant to be seen, to be valued, and to leave a legacy. And so, the story of Tom Jenkins, the black janitor who became CEO, reached its peak. His transformation from a humble worker to the head of a multi-million-dollar company was not just about financial success. It was about restoring dignity, opportunity, and equity to those who had long been overlooked. It was about taking control of a system that had never truly been theirs, and showing the world that true leadership isn't defined by titles, but by the impact you have on the lives of others. Tom's journey was a testament to resilience, to the quiet strength that often goes unnoticed, and to the idea that it's never too late to change the course of your life and the lives of those around you. How do you like this story? I myself did not expect such a turn. Share your opinion in the comments. It will be interesting to listen to you. Subscribe and wait for new stories on our channel.